Welcome to the Arc of Justice on Brookline Interactive Group's Big TV. I'm Eric Hyatt. This is the third of a three-part series on the response to anti-Asian bias in Brookline. My guest is Ashley Eng. Ashley grew up in Brookline, attended Brookline High School, and she's a sophomore at UMass. She is an activist and organizer and has been front and center in the town's response to incidents of anti-Asian bias. Please welcome Ashley. Hi, and we usually start by just asking you to say your name and how you first came to Brookline.
Hi, my name is Ashley. I use she, her pronouns. And so I basically grew up in Brookline my entire life. However, I was born in Malaysia because my mom is Malaysian and she really wanted to have her firstborn child in her home country where her parents and friends and families are. So she flew back, had me. We were there for a little while, and then we came back to Brookline where my dad was.
Got it. So you pretty much were grew up in Brookline, born in Malaysia, but you grew up here.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, I go back to Malaysia, or prior to the pandemic, I was privileged enough to go back once a year. So I would say that Malaysia is like my second home, but I spend 10 out of 12 months of my life in Brookline.
Got it. So you went to elementary school, high school here, all of that.
Yep, from Beep to BHS.
Oh, wow. Which elementary school did you go to? I didn't ask you that.
I went to the Ridley School.
Got it. And how about anything else that you would like people to know about your family, interest, etc.? Before we get into
Um,
the more substantive part of it, Chad, I like people to get to know you as a person.
yeah, of course. I mean, I think Malaysia, being from Malaysia, is something that really has shaped who I am today. I mean, just going back and witnessing the difference in cultures is something that has influenced the way in which I view different things. And on top of that, it's just this interesting idea of being a minority here and then going to Malaysia where most people, majority of people look like me, but yet there's like this huge cultural divide because of my, I guess, American upbringing, you could say. And then I think that has also just really shaped the way in which I interact with my Asian American identity.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating, and I'm pleased to say you're the first person of Malaysian origin that's come on the show. So excited about that as well. Um, well, this is, as you know, the third part of a three-part series I'm doing on the response to anti-Asian bias in Brookline, which has been a pretty serious issue. And I will say your name has come up in both of the other interviews as somebody who is doing something about this topic. So for our viewers who don't know the full story, what are some of the issues about the Asian experience in Brookline and nationwide?
Yeah, so I guess to speak about it more broadly,
Mhm.
some things that I think many Asians and Asian Americans may face are microaggressions, also the model minority myth, which is the belief that Asians, like all Asians, are successful and hardworking, typically East Asians. This idea of being a perpetual foreigner, and then also, I guess you could say, feeling a little bit like a quote, an afterthought when it comes to conversations about race and racism. But in terms of zooming into like Brookline specifics, I think there is this sense of liberal leaning politics in Brookline, which personally I think is pretty dangerous because it often leaves people with this impression or idea that we as a community um, do enough to support like how diverse we are, how we confront racism, and that we feel knowledgeable about the issues that the AAPI community faces. However, I don't really think that that is the case. For example, after the murder of the six Asian women in Atlanta, I had lots of people reaching out to me, which, was nice because they were reaching out. But on the other hand, it was just a lot to take in. They were reaching out to me like hours after the murder had happened, and they were asking me for advice on what steps they could take as allies. And like I was still just trying to wrap my head around what had happened, and I do think part of the reason why those folks who reached out, who like are what they like to consider allies, I think part of why they felt like doing so was okay, and in the way that they reached out was okay, was because we're in Brookline and because of this idea of liberal leaning politics, because it can often feel like we're living in this bubble where it makes us, where it makes it easier, I guess you could say, to feel detached from things that are happening in different places. However, I think I just kind of want to remind people that anti-Asian racism does happen in our own backyard. To throw in like another personal story, I actually did have a fellow community member who is Asian identifying reach out to me, and I didn't know who this person was. It was my first time hearing from them ever. And they had reached out to me because they had read something that I wrote in the Brookline tab. And they shared their really personal and upsetting story about the anti-Asian racism that they faced in their neighborhood. For privacy reasons, I obviously will not detail the story, but they were asking me for advice about what actions they could take. And, it's because they expressed to me that, I guess, prior to reading my piece, they felt they felt alone, and they felt like it just wasn't really worth speaking up about what they had experienced. And I think something that really breaks my heart when I think about this story is that feeling of isolation and that feeling of not being like worth enough to speak up. And I just like can't imagine how many other people in our community might be feeling the same way, and that they also might be feeling like they have nowhere to go.
That's really powerful stuff. So it sounds to me like white people maybe would you I mean, maybe just went too far, came in too strong, too early, and you say that it was Brookline that kind of allowed them to feel the sense to do that. And meanwhile, you're also hearing from like at least one Asian person with really like very difficult stories. So that's got to be a lot to process all at once.
Yeah, it is a lot to hear both sides while also navigating your own perception. Obviously, I don't want to generalize and say all white people, but I do think it does circle back to this idea of liberal leaning politics in Brookline.
No, I really appreciate what you're talking about. It's come up before on the show, so I really appreciate your kind of calling us in on this topic. And what groups and organizations are you a part of that are doing something about racism and protecting our Asian communities?
Yeah, so within the larger community, so across the state, but I guess we've primarily been centered around Greater Boston. I have recently started organizing for this new group that's called Asian Coalition Massachusetts. And within Brookline, I have had the honor to collaborate with the Brookline Asian American Family Network.
Sorry, just getting my light right. Brookline Asian American Family Network. And how did you come to join these groups yourself?
Yeah, so Asian Coalition MA, as I mentioned, is a really new group. And we came together because it was mainly in response to the increasing anti-Asian racism that was occurring, and a group of other fellow AAPI identifying organizers, and I really wanted to create a space for AAPI youth to take action and to find community. Oh, and then in terms of BAAFN, I actually started collaborating a little bit, or I guess a lot actually, with BAAFN when I was a senior at BHS. So not too long ago, like a couple years ago. And it was because I was helping lead the initiative to make Lunar New Year a Category 1 holiday in Brookline, meaning no school. Fun fact, this year was the first year where it was Category 1. And through my work on that project, I was able to meet the people at BAAFN who are truly such an inspiration to me. And I'm so, so thankful that I've had the privilege and honor of being in contact with them and more recently working closely with their initiatives.
I know they're really excited about you as well, Ashley. So I mean, it sounds like a real coming together. What are some of the actions that you and your colleagues have taken? And please, why don't you take a minute about the Lunar New Year, just to update some of our viewers who might not know the full story. As I understand it, we're one of three municipalities now in the country that observe Lunar New Year as a Category 1 holiday. Am I basically right about that?
Yeah, I think that is true. I believe it's New York City and then San Francisco that also celebrate. So it's kind of cool that Brookline is next. But essentially, I mean, the work for Lunar New Year goes back way back to 2012, and it was led by Alan Joe, who was advocating for it to be Category 1, and then it ended up being designated as a Category 2 holiday. Then my friends and I in high school, we came along, and honestly, I think the work was fueled by anger because of all the conflicts that were happening on the same day as the holiday, and then we had some teachers who were just completely disrespecting the designation, and then we really tried to push the effort forwards, and then after a couple school committee meetings, superintendent, etc., we were able to get it designated as a Category 1 holiday with the help of the community. It was truly a community effort.
What else? I know that I was at a vigil at the high school a few weeks ago that I know that you were involved in. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the actions that you and your colleagues have been taking more recently?
Yeah, totally. So to talk briefly about Asian Coalition Massachusetts, we actually really recently held a march in Boston that was centering Asian femmes, gender nonconforming folks, and women. Through this march, we wanted to, of course, raise awareness and create space for the community to come together, but we also put forth a list of demands, and a few of them were centered around calls to end displacement of low-income BIPOC families, decriminalizing sex work, and defunding the police. But these are just a few of the many demands. As of right now, I believe we are trying to establish a mutual aid network for the API community, as well as just support ongoing work that has been occurring, or that has been pioneered by existing community organizations, and ultimately just creating a space for AAPI youth to build community and organize and take action.
What was that like, that march?
That march, I think it felt powerful. All of the speakers, they came from really different backgrounds and they shared their really personal stories. And I think the folks in Asian Coalition MA who pioneered the organizing of the march the most, I think that they designed it really well, such that everything was with intention. And I think just that feeling of coming together as a community and asking for these demands is something that, I don't know, it's just a really special feeling. And I think I was really, really fortunate to be able to help contribute to the organizing process.
Wow. Wow. So there's a lot going on right now, and this show is viewed by a large cross section of people in Brookline. What would you suggest for somebody who may have a low level of civic engagement currently? What types of action might they take to show support and solidarity? And that goes for both Asian viewers and also for on non-Asian viewers.
Yeah, so I mean, I think broadly speaking, folks could take the time to learn how diverse our history is or attend bystander and ally trainings. I know those are really accessible right now. And then also just listen to our stories and our calls to action. I will say that a very actionable item that people can do if they're eligible to vote is to vote in the town election on May 4th. And I really urge people to vote for progressive candidates. like Miriam Ashkenazi for the select board, Scott Ananian for town moderator, and Val Frias for school committee. And I do say this because I have personally spoken to all of these candidates, and I am so confident that they will protect and advocate the AAPI community and other traditionally overlooked communities, because ultimately, by voting for candidates who actively hold racial justice and equity in the core of their platforms, I think that is really the only way that we'll be able to dismantle the systems that uphold white supremacy and reach collective liberation.
Wow, that is very clear, and it gives our viewers something they can do in the short term as well as in the medium term. I would like to ask, is there something that we haven't covered that you would like to share with our viewers, or a message you want to make sure that that gets across today?
Yeah, of course. I think intersectionality is something that's really important. And that, with that being said, it's important to understand that these instances of anti-Asian racism, they don't happen in isolation, right? For example, in Atlanta, what happened was an intersection of racism, sexism, and classism.
Mm.
And I think with that being said, it's really important solidarity among minority groups. And for the AAPI community specifically, this means that we can't look for safety in systems that harm other minority groups, so such as policing. And we also have to actively work to eliminate the prejudices in our community that do uphold these systems of oppression. So ultimately, all of us have a lot of hard work to do, and there is no one and done solution. Um, and as AAPI folks, we have to embrace the complexities of our political identity and the opposing forces within our communities in order to affect continuous change. And we have to continue to be loud. And to the allies, folks need to learn and embrace the complexities of our community and make space for our voices and listen to us and see us and just listen some more.
Do you think real change is possible in Brookline? And what would that look like? This is my last question, I promise.
I think it's possible. I want to be optimistic and say yes. I mean, something that I didn't touch upon earlier was all the work that the Brookline Asian American Family Network has been pushing forward for a really, really long time. And so, I mean, personally, I've been working a lot with Alicia Shu, who is on BAAFN steering committee, and we have been pushing forward a list of what I like to call demands that the school committee and the public schools of Brookline can listen to. And I think if allies, listen to the demands that we put forward and actively take action and implement them, I think such change is possible in Brookline.
Ms. Shu sounds like an amazing human being. Her name has come up so many times as somebody who's just been doing a lot. So it's 3 for 3 in my this 3-part series that everyone has brought up her name, and I hope I'll someday be able to have her on the show as well. But it sounds like she is a just a tireless leader and someone working hard in the background.
That is true. Alicia is probably one of my biggest inspirations, and I have to thank her for so many things. She is exactly what you described her as, a true social justice warrior.